To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Now, I consider myself to be a pretty big Disneyland fan, but wow, there are some things in here even I didn't know. And I know you might be saying, well, I know everything about Disneyland, and that's good, I'm glad. But you might not know everything about Disneyland. And no, we're not talking about Walt's apartment or the basketball court inside the Matterhorn in this video. That's baby stuff. We're talking about the big leagues. So, without further ado, here are 5 things you might not have known about Disneyland. Now, with number 5, we're going to start off easy. We're going to start off with a simple one. Doritos at Disneyland. Everybody knows this one, but for those of you who don't, let me take you back in time. So, in the early days of Disneyland, the founder of Frito-Lay, Elmer Doolin, convinced Walt Disney to allow him to open up a Tex-Mex restaurant in Frontierland. Today, it is known as Rancho de Zocalo, but back in the day, it was known as Rancho de Frito. Now, at Rancho de Frito, they served all different kinds of Mexican foods and tacos, hard shell tacos, with the shell made from Frito chips. But they did not make the taco shells inside the park. Instead, they licensed it out to Alex Food Companies, a local, Anaheim food company. One day in the early 1960s, one of the salespeople saw discarded tortilla shells in the trash can. At that point, he decided to tell a chef to just make them into chips and sell them instead of losing a profit and throwing away these discarded taco shells. The chips were a massive hit with guests, but one day Arch West, the vice president of marketing at Frito-Lay, was passing by Rancho de Frito and noticed how well these chips were selling, so he decided to take them back under the company's name and sold them as Doritos. Now, many of you are probably familiar with that story, and that's fine, but I have some stories you might not be familiar with. This moves us ahead to the second thing you might not know about Disneyland, the beginning of churros at Disneyland. Now, if there's any snack food that I enjoy at the Disney parks besides mint juleps and everything else, it's the churros. Now, the churros at Disneyland were introduced in 1985, and this is because a man who worked in foods and beverages in Fantasyland named Jim Lohman, who, by the way, still works at Disneyland to this day. Wow. See, the story goes like this. In 1985, they were going to open up this dance location at Disneyland called Videopolis. Apparently, Jim went out to the Long Beach Grand Prix and saw his very first churro booth. Jim realized that making churros was very easy to do, and all you really had to do was keep them warm, and children and young kids would flock to the churro stand to get one. So, being the detective he was, he snooped around in a trash can and found a box for J&J Churros. So, the next work week, he phoned the company and asked if they'd like to do business with Disneyland. And obviously, they were super excited. But the normal 6-inch churros were not enough for Disney. They needed to plus it, as Disney does. So they doubled the length and made it a foot long. Now, Disney wasn't very sure churros were going to work when they first introduced them, so they put a stand in Frontierland to sell the treat. And as you might have guessed, they were a smash hit. And that is why there are churros in Disneyland today. Boy, I could really use a churro. But let's move on to our number 3 thing you might not know about Disneyland: alcohol at Disneyland. Yeah. Besides Club 33. Now, everyone knows that Walt did not enjoy alcohol inside his park besides Club 33, but what you may not have known is that while Walt was alive, alcohol was served on Disney property. Now, I say on property because it's not exactly inside the park. Holidayland was a sort of picnic area that resided outside of the Disneyland park, and even Walt Disney himself acknowledged that with every picnic you need a beer. And so, the sale of alcohol on Disneyland property began, and then ended very quickly. And now we reach number 4 in our countdown, the Snore of Brer Bear. During the early days of the mine train through Nature's Wonderland, when you traveled through Rainbow Ridge, the town that is now at the end of Big Thunder Mountain, you would pass by a hotel, and coming from the hotel on the 2nd story would be someone snoring. But this snore goes back even further to a deleted scene in Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, where they were making a bed for Snow White, and of course, Sleepy falls asleep. They decided not to use this scene in the final movie, but they did end up recycling the snore. Now fast forward to when they are constructing Bear Country. Yeah, you guys might not have known that. Before Critter Country, there was Bear Country. As you walk past the Haunted Mansion where Splash Mountain is today, there's a sort of hill or mountain that you have to curve around to get to the Country Bear Jamboree. At the top of the mountain there is a cave, and you can hear faint snoring coming from the cave on top of the mountain. And there is a sign on top of the mountain letting you know that yes, the snoring is Rufus's snoring, Rufus being one of the bears inside the Country Bear Jamboree. And then they build Splash Mountain. So they just moved Rufus's snore up towards one of the drops and kept it the same. Eventually, Disneyland did away with the Country Bears and moved Winnie the Pooh in its place. So with the Country Bears gone, Disney decided to change it from Rufus's snore to Brer Bear's snore. So just remember, when you hear Brer Bear snoring, you're actually hearing a Disney legend from a deleted scene of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Pretty cool. And now on to our last Disneyland fact that you might not have known: Nazis in Disneyland. Yeah, see, that thumbnail wasn't just for shock value. Now this story starts at World War II with Operation Paperclip. Essentially it's where the United States and other countries would give Nazi scientists immunity in exchange for their knowledge. Werner von Braun was one of these people. He was a Nazi SS officer, the worst of the worst. With Operation Paperclip though, he was allowed inside the United States. He was hired to develop rockets for the US military. You can see where this is going: rockets, Disneyland. Eventually Werner became the first director of NASA and then went on to work at Disneyland helping develop shows. Eventually, Von Braun and the popular Disney Imagineer John Hench came up with the Moonliner rocket, the one that you see in Tomorrowland. And the Moonliner is basically the V2 rocket just with fins. So when you look up at the Moonliner at Disneyland, remember, that's a Nazi rocket. Hans Scharf was another Nazi that had an influence on the Disney parks. Scharf was a Nazi interrogator who was the best of the best during World War II. Eventually after the war and with Operation Paperclip, he was hired by Disney and did the mosaics at the Creole Cafe at Disneyland and other areas around Disneyland. Eventually he went on to do the mosaics inside Cinderella Castle at Walt Disney World. His daughter Monica also did the mosaic outside the land at Walt Disney World. So next time you walk through Cinderella Castle, make sure to look up at the mosaics and remember, a Nazi SS officer / interrogator did those. Doesn't mean they're not good, they're beautiful, but interesting. Hello everybody and welcome to the end of the video. Now if you've been keeping up with me on Twitter or Patreon, you will know that this is the last video of the month and I will be giving a shout out to my April and May patrons from Patreon. If you want to get a shout out in next month's last video of the month, make sure to donate to me at patreon.com/offhanddisneyland and I will make sure to show my thanks. So without further ado, here are your April and May patrons. Luis Terrazas says, "Hey man, I barely stumbled across your videos and I immediately loved it. Having lived in Cali and gone over 95 times in 2 years, yes, 95 times, I love Disneyland. Now living across the country, your channel keeps the memories alive. Keep up the fantastic work, man." Thank you, Luis. That is my goal in life, to go to Disneyland 95 times in 2 years. Nelly Ruiz says, "You're one of the Disney-related channels that really separates itself with its uniqueness from all the others, and I love that. Very funny, witty stuff." Smiley face. Love your stuff, man. Thank you very much, Nelly. I am trying to separate myself from those other channels. Just you wait for the in-park videos, though. Those are going to be a whole different thing. You guys are going to love them. And now we have a comment from my boss, the man himself, Jean Lafitte. He says, "Fidget spinners should be banned from Disneyland. 1 like equals 1 prayer." What a world we live in. And now a very special thanks to all of my patrons. Tim Kinsella, Pat Lloyd, Jean Lafitte, Luis Terrazas, Nelly Ruiz, Josh Farley, Samuel Javette, I hope I pronounced that right, Super, Emma Markle, Nick Zina, and Melissa Vigna. Thank you all for donating, and just know that you guys help this thing work. A big thank you to all my viewers and subscribers, and I will see you guys in the next video next month. Goodbye.